In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about the impacts advanced technological system has on belief system of a modern society.
That things, belief systems, but also technological systems now have transformed the world so radically that the conflict between modernism and traditional forms of belief is acutely felt everywhere. It's certainly, I think, one of the forces that have given rise to the battle between Islamic fundamentalism and modernism. Because it's more that than a battle of Islamic fundamentalism against the Western world. And the problem fundamentally is that people typically exist within cultural constructs that are very, very ancient and that are grounded in evolved systems of meaning that are even deeper than the ones that are articulated and explicit. And when there's a period of very, very rapid cognitive and technological change, then the integrity of those systems starts to become questionable from an explicit perspective, but it also starts to become insufficient from a practical perspective. So one example that you might give some consideration to is the fact of the introduction of the birth control pill, for example. And if you listen to politically minded people, they make the case that the emancipation of women was essentially a political matter, but I don't think that that's a very reasonable way of looking at it at all. Of course, everything feeds back onto itself, and there are multiple causal pathways to any end. The radical element in the emancipation of women was, of course, the development of efficient forms of contraception, most particularly the birth control pill. And it's the case that as soon as you educate women anywhere in the world, not only does economic productivity rise dramatically, in fact, it's actually the best predictor of increase in economic productivity in a modernizing state is the granting of rights to women. Now, whether it's directly because of the granting of rights to women or because of the existence of an underlying belief structure that allows the concept of right to expand quite rapidly is very difficult to be sure of. But in any case, that exists. And then, of course, the other thing that happens is that women stop having children unbelievably rapidly. So, for example, I believe it's Iran, where this has been most marked over the last 2 generations. So from family sizes far greater than replacement to family sizes well below replacement in basically 1 or 2 generations. It's a massive transformation, and it's not necessarily something that anyone expected. It's part of the sequence of forces that are rapidly allowing our population to reach a peak and then either stabilize or decline. I don't know how many of you know this, but the projections are that there'll be 9 billion people on the earth within 30 to 50 years, and that'll be our peak population. After that, it will fall rapidly. And you can see that sort of thing happening right now all over the Western world, and it's happening a lot in China, and it's happening in Japan, where there are more older people than there are younger people because the younger people aren't having enough children to actually replace the population. So the probability that we'll peak at about 9 billion and then start to fall, it's not certain, but that's what the best projections seem to indicate now. Well, so what happens anyways in periods of very rapid technological and cognitive transformation, because those things go together, that the certainties upon which people base their interpretation of the world, and even more importantly, base their judgments about how to act, start to become uncertain. So, for example, if you introduce the birth control pill into a population and you put women's reproductive faculties under their own voluntary choice, then you radically transform virtually all of society's fundamental social structures, not least marriage. And marriage, of course, is being regarded classically as the foundation of civilization. And, of course, increasingly, there are more people who aren't married than there are people who are married. Now, it's very difficult to know what to make of that because, of course, there's no setting the clock back. And it's not even clear that you would want to set back the clock if you could. But expecting cultural constructs which take centuries or maybe even thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of years to develop to keep up with change of that magnitude it's not possible. You know, I mean, and you guys face technological transformations that are earth-shattering on an almost yearly basis, and you hardly even notice it. I mean, Tinder is a good example of that. You know, I don't know if you know, but Tinder has produced quite a spike in sexually transmitted diseases. But, you know, it's a radical technology because it's the first technology that's ever been invented that enables men to find partners with no fear, with virtually no fear of rejection. And of course, that's been a limiting factor that's been a defining feature of the interactions between men and women ever since history began. And so these things are occurring at an extraordinary rate. And of course, it's not reasonable to expect our more slower moving cultural constructs to keep up with them. And that's partly because as well that, you know, people talk, for example, about the divisive nature of religion. You often hear people who are critics of formal religion in particular talk about the fact that religion underlies a tremendous amount of destruction and warfare and conflict. And, you know, first of all, it isn't religion that does that, by the way. It's tribalism, and tribalism characterizes even chimpanzees, and I don't think chimpanzees go to war with each other for religious reasons. So, you know, the religious groupings of mankind are large-scale manifestations of the same phenomena that produce dominance hierarchies in the wild. And of course, large-scale religions unite people within the religion just as much as they divide people on the outside of it. So part of the accumulation of religious tradition across time is a process that allows thousands and 10,000s and even millions of people to exist within the same hierarchy of values and exist relatively peacefully as a consequence. Now I'm saying relatively peacefully. You know, 100 years ago it was thought that let's say archaic people, so those would be people who are still living a fairly isolated tribal life in small groups, you know, basically operating at the level of Stone Age technology, let's say. The idea was, there was a very popular idea for a long time, that those cultures were communistic and violence-free, and that's wrong. They're not violence-free at all. If you track the homicide rates in Stone Age cultures, they're way, way higher than they are in civilized cultures, like orders of magnitude higher. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but I'm just telling you that because you want to dispense with the idea that along with complex civilizations and the spread, say, of unifying religious beliefs, there was an increase in baseline violence, because there's just no evidence for that at all.